The boy was 8 years old, barefoot on gravel, and he walked straight toward the most dangerous man in Red Creek without flinching. 12 motorcycles had rumbled to a stop outside a shuttered service station at the edge of town. 12 men who'd buried friends, survived wars, and outlasted everything the world threw at them. They didn't stop for strangers. They didn't stop for much at all. But something about that old military motorcycle beneath the tarp made Gideon Mercer cut his engine. And something about the silence that followed made every one of his brothers do the same. The boy stopped in front of the largest bike, looked up at the rider, and asked the question that would crack 30 years of silence wide open. "Is this your bike, Grandpa?" Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Because when the boy opened the locket around his neck, the photograph inside stopped every heartbeat on that gravel lot. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome. What you're about to hear is the kind of story that doesn't let you go. Subscribe now, hit the notification bell, and stay until the very last word, because this one will stay with you long after it's over. Drop a like, and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's ride. The town of Red Creek had been dying for 20 years, and it had gotten comfortable with dying. The coal company pulled out in 2001. The highway bypass killed the diner in 2004. The last school closed in 2009. What remained was a scatter of weather-beaten houses along a single main street, a gas station that sold more lottery tickets than fuel, and the kind of silence that settles into a place when everyone who could leave already has. The mountains above the valley were beautiful in the way that indifferent things are beautiful. Granite shoulders draped in pine, streaked with early October snow that hadn't been forecast and didn't apologize for arriving. The creek itself ran cold and fast through the town center, the color of gunmetal in the flat afternoon light. No one fished it anymore. No one had reason to linger near it. The sound of the water was just background noise to the quiet collapse happening on every street. It was into this collapse that the Iron Covenant rode. They came down the mountain road in a single line, 12 motorcycles dropping from the tree line like a slow iron storm, the sound of their engines filling the valley before the town could even see them. The reverb bounced off the canyon walls and then settled into the streets, low and resonant, the kind of sound that gets into your chest and stays. Curtains shifted in windows. The man pumping gas outside the station let the nozzle hang and watched without moving. Gideon Mercer rode first. He was 63 years old with a gray beard that had gone white at the jaw, and he wore it the way old wood wears weather, earned, not decorated. He was a large man, had been large his whole life, though the years had redistributed the weight of him into something heavier and less obvious than simple size. His riding jacket was black leather so old it had cracked at the elbows and been repaired with electrical tape twice and left unrepaired a third time. The Iron Covenant patch on his back was faded. The name stitched below it, Grizz, had been restitched at least once by someone with slightly different thread, and the difference in color was visible up close. He hadn't spoken more than necessary and longer than most of his brothers could remember. Not since the thing with Rachel, not since the fire. They called it the thing with Rachel because nobody, including Grizz, could say it plainly. His daughter, his only child. Gone at 22, 8 months pregnant, after a fight that Grizz had never described to another living person and never planned to. The wildfire that consumed Highway 9 3 days after she left was ruled accidental. The bones found in the wreckage of a burned-out car on the switchback were never conclusively identified. The county closed the file in 1994 because the county had more pressing concerns than one missing woman on a mountain highway in October. Grizz had ridden every October since. Not searching. He'd stopped believing in finding 30 years ago. He rode because stopping felt like a different kind of disappearance, and he was afraid of what would be left of him if he stopped moving. The Brotherhood followed because that's what brothers do. They came into Red Creek with no agenda beyond fuel and maybe coffee if the gas station had something that passed for it. They weren't supposed to stop here. The town wasn't on the route. But Grizz had pulled off the highway at the exit sign without signaling, without explanation, and 11 men had followed him down the ramp without question, because that was also what brothers did. The service station at the edge of town wasn't operational. The canopy over the pumps had partially collapsed on one side, warped by years of snow load, and the pumps themselves were covered with a green tarp tied down with bungee cords. The building behind it, a low brick structure that had once been a repair shop, had its windows boarded. A painted sign above the garage door, barely legible, Mercer, Auto, and Cycle. The paint beneath the words had peeled enough to show an older layer, Mercer and Son. Grizz stopped his motorcycle in the parking lot and sat with the engine running for a long moment before he cut it. The silence that followed was the particular silence of 12 engines going quiet in rapid succession, each one swallowed by the mountains until only the creek and the wind remained. He didn't dismount immediately. He just looked at the building, at the sign, at the garage door with its broken lock hanging open on one side. Grizz. That was Shepard. Danny Shepard, 47, road captain, the man who handled most of the talking when talking was needed. He'd pulled up alongside and sat watching his president with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read weather in a man's posture. "You need a minute?" Grizz didn't answer. He swung off the bike and walked toward the garage. The door groaned when he pushed it, metal dragging on cracked concrete. Inside, the light came through the gap between the boarded windows and the warped frames in thin yellow bars, picking out dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. The floor was oil-stained concrete. A long workbench ran along one wall, empty, except for a rusted coffee can and a single socket wrench someone had left behind like a period at the end of a sentence. And in the center of the floor, covered with a canvas tarp gone gray with grime, sat a motorcycle. Grizz stopped. He stood there long enough that Shepard came in behind him, then two more, Hector Bricks Dominguez and Calvin Reeves, known as Crow for the tattoo covering the left side of his face, a sprawling black bird that most people found unsettling until they knew him, at which point they found it accurate. "What is that?" Crow said. Not a question. Grizz moved to the tarp and lifted one corner. The canvas came up stiffly, releasing a cloud of dust that caught the light. He pulled it back farther, and the machine beneath it took shape, a 1963 military surplus Harley-Davidson, XLCH Sportster, olive green beneath the grime, the kind of motorcycle the Army had stopped running by the mid-70s. The chrome had oxidized brown. The seat leather had cracked and dried to something like jerky. The handlebars were straight and original. It was identical in model, year, and configuration to the motorcycle Grizz had ridden into every battle of his adult life. The first bike he'd ever owned, purchased in 1979 from a salvage dealer in Roanoke with 3 months of post-deployment back pay. "Grizz," Shepard said carefully. Grizz let the tarp fall. He turned and walked back outside without speaking. The other 9 men were still mounted, or leaning on their bikes, or standing in the loose formation that 12 people unconsciously adopt when they're waiting for leadership to return. Grizz walked past them to his own Harley and stood beside it with his back to the building and his hands on his hips and looked at the mountains. The wind came down off the granite ridgeline and smelled like snow and pine and something older than both. Nobody spoke. That was when the boy appeared. He came from the side street beside the old station, moving in that particular way of children who have learned that adults either don't see them or choose not to. Quietly, without apparent destination, but with clear purpose. He was small, 8 years old, maybe 9, though something about the economy of his movement suggested a child who'd grown up faster than his years. His jeans were clean but worn at both knees. His jacket was too light for October in the mountains. He was barefoot on gravel and didn't seem to notice. He stopped in front of Grizz's motorcycle. He looked at it the way children look at things that mean something to them already, not with the surprise of discovery, but with the recognition of reunion. Then he looked up at Grizz. "Is this your bike, Grandpa?" The word landed in the lot like something dropped from a height. A couple of the younger brothers, Marcus Webb and T-Bone, both still in their 30s, both with imperfect poker faces, let out sounds that were almost laughs before they caught themselves. Shepard made a sharp, small motion with his hand, and those sounds died. Because Grizz had gone completely still. Not the stillness of surprise. Not the stillness of a man caught off guard. The stillness of a man who has heard something that reaches past the rational mind and touches a nerve so old and buried and protected that the body locks up before the brain can process what's happening. "Kid," Crow said, moving forward gently, "you lost." The boy didn't look at Crow. He kept his eyes on Grizz. "My mom told me to find the man with the Eagle motorcycle," the boy said. His voice was clear and level. No performance in it, no fear. "She said he'd know who I was." Grizz turned his head very slowly and looked at the boy for the first time. Who's your mother? The words came out flat, sandpapered down to nothing. Rachel, the boy said. The name hit Grizz in the sternum. His left hand, resting on the seat of his Harley, closed into a fist without his permission. Rachel who? Grizz said. The boy reached beneath his collar and pulled out a chain. At the end of it hung a locket, silver, worn smooth on one face, where it had been held repeatedly, the hinge dark with age. He opened it with the practiced ease of a child who had done this 10,000 times and held it up. Inside, on the left panel, was a photograph so faded by decades that the figures in it were barely visible. Two people standing beside a motorcycle. A young man, early 30s, bearded, standing with his hand on the handlebars. A little girl, maybe 4 or 5, seated sideways on the gas tank with her legs dangling, grinning at whoever held the camera. The motorcycle in the photograph was an olive green 1963 Harley-Davidson XLCH Sportster. The young man in the photograph was Gideon Mercer, 30 years younger, 30 years lighter, with the particular look of a man who still believed the worst was behind him, but recognizable. Absolutely, unmistakably recognizable. Shepard made a sound low in his throat. Crow stepped back. Grizz stared at the photograph for a long time. His jaw worked. His eyes did something complicated and then went still. "Where is she?" he said. His voice had dropped to something barely above the wind. The boy's expression changed then, just slightly. The chin came up a degree, the way a child controls itself when controlling itself is all it has left. "She died," the boy said, 6 weeks ago. The mountains didn't move. The creek kept running. The wind continued its business. But something shifted on that gravel lot that no one present would be able to describe adequately later. Some pressure change. Some drop in temperature that had nothing to do with altitude, some quality of silence that was different from the silence before the boy spoke. Grizz sat down on the step of the gas station canopy. Not dramatically, not the way men fall when they're performing grief. He sat down the way a man sits when his legs have simply made a decision independently of his intentions. Crow looked at Shepard. Shepard looked at the boy. "What's your name, son?" Shepard asked. "Eli," the boy said. "Eli Mercer." Shepard absorbed that, the name, the last name. He looked at Grizz, who was staring at the gravel between his boots with an expression that belonged to a man looking at something much farther away. "Where are you staying?" Shepard asked Eli. "The motel on the creek. Room 7. My mom's friend, Mrs. Aldridge, brought me here. She left this morning. She said Grandpa would come." He said it without elaboration, without drama, as though this entire situation, 12 bikers in a dead-end town and a dead mother's last errand, was simply the next thing on a list. "She said he always rides through Red Creek in October." Grizz's head came up slowly. He looked at the boy with an expression that was part devastation and part something else, something fighting for space alongside the devastation, something that hadn't had room in his chest in 30 years. "She never died," he said. "Not to anyone. To the air." "She was sick for a long time," Eli said. "She didn't want me to know until she knew it wasn't going to get better." "Where were you living?" "Coopersville. Before that, Harlan County. Before that—" The boy hesitated for the first time. His eyes moved, a quick reconnaissance. "She moved us a lot. She said it was because she liked new places. But I don't think that was all of it." Grizz stood up. He moved to the boy and crouched down in front of him, leather creaking, knees popping, bringing himself to eye level. Up close, looking at the boy's face, something passed through his expression that his brothers had not seen in longer than memory. Something raw and unguarded and almost unbearable to witness. The boy had Rachel's eyes, pale gray-green, almost silver, unusual in a way that caught the light differently depending on the angle. Grizz had not seen those eyes in 30 years, and he was looking at them now on a face that was otherwise shaped like someone else's. Sharp jaw, dark coloring, features he didn't recognize at all. "Can I see the locket again?" Grizz said quietly. The boy took it from around his neck and placed it in Grizz's palm. Grizz examined the right panel of the locket, which had been empty-looking in the boy's display, but now, held close, showed a different object, not a photograph. A piece of metal, thin and flat, fitted into the locket's inner frame as though it had been cut to size deliberately. A key, half of one, rather, the bow and barrel of a brass key, sheared precisely at the midpoint, Engraved along the barrel with the clean lines of an eagle in profile, wings slightly raised, the rendering detailed enough to be almost architectural. Grizz went very still. "Shepard," he said. Shepard was already beside him. He looked at the half key. He didn't say anything. "I need you to look at something on my bike," Grizz said. He stood. He moved to his Harley. He crouched beside the rear fender and worked his fingers along the underside of the seat mounting. A particular spot, a specific seam, and something gave under his thumb. A panel, recessed and flush with the frame, hinged outward. Inside the cavity, no larger than a deck of cards, rested a small leather pouch secured with a drawstring. He loosened the drawstring and turned the pouch over. A key fell into his palm. Half a key. Brass. Sheared at the midpoint, engraved with an eagle in profile, wings slightly raised. The brothers who had gathered close enough to see went quiet in a way that was different from ordinary quiet. Crow spoke first. "Is that—" "Yeah," Grizz said. He held the two halves together. They matched, blade to blade, the cut faces aligned perfectly. The eagle engraving continuous across both pieces, the teeth of the blade completing a pattern that only made sense when joined. Eli watched this without expression. Then he said, "She said you'd know what it unlocks." Grizz looked at him. "She didn't tell you?" "She said some things were safer if I didn't know them yet." The boy's voice stayed even, but his hands, Grizz noticed, had closed around the hem of his jacket. A small, controlled gesture. "She said you'd explain." Grizz straightened. He held both halves of the key in one fist and stood in the October wind outside the station that had borne his family name, looking at this child with his daughter's eyes. And something was happening inside his chest that he did not have a vocabulary for, and wasn't sure he wanted one. "Who else knew you were coming here?" he said. The boy blinked. "What? Did Mrs. Aldridge tell anyone where she was taking you?" Eli thought about this. Something moved in his face. "There was a man," he said slowly, "at the motel, yesterday. He came to our room and said he was a social worker. Mom had told me—" The boy stopped, started again, more carefully. "Mom told me if anyone said they were from the government and asked about the locket, to not show it to them. To say I didn't have it." The air changed. Crow and Shepard exchanged a look above the boy's head. "What did he look like?" Grizz said. "Tall, hair cut real short. He had a watch with a NATO strap, the kind that's canvas." The boy delivered this with the precision of a child whose mother had trained him to observe and remember. "He asked me my mom's full name and where we'd lived before Coopersville. I said I didn't know. He didn't believe me." "Where is he now?" Shepard said. "I don't know. He left when Mrs. Aldridge came back to the room and started yelling at him." Grizz turned to Shepard and spoke quietly. "Get Bricks and Marcus on the street approaches. Tell T-Bone to run the motel. I want to know if there's anyone new in town." He looked at Crow. "Stay with the boy." Crow nodded. Shepard was already moving, pulling his phone, speaking in the low shorthand of a man who gives field instructions often enough not to need extra words. Grizz crouched in front of Eli again. He looked at the boy for a long moment. He chose his words with the economy of a man who'd learned to spend them carefully. "Your mother was smart," he said. "She taught you well." Something shifted in the boy's face. Not tears, not quite, but the near thing. The controlled version of near tears that children learn when they've had to hold themselves together for people who couldn't. "She said you were stubborn," Eli said. "She said you'd argue about the locket." Grizz almost smiled. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that had been inoperative for a long time. "She wasn't wrong. She also said—" Eli stopped, looked at the locket still in Grizz's hand. "She said to give you this in person, not to mail it, not to have Mrs. Aldridge give it, in person." His voice held steady with effort. "Because she knew you wouldn't believe it was real if she wasn't there to make you believe it." Grizz looked at the two halves of the key. At the eagle engraved across both pieces, the image whole only when held together. "She was right," he said. The afternoon light was dropping behind the granite ridge line. The temperature was falling with it, faster than it should have, the kind of drop that precedes weather. In the distance, down the main street of Red Creek, a black SUV was moving slowly past the hardware store. An SUV with no plates visible from this angle, moving at the particular speed of a vehicle not looking for a parking space. Crow saw it. He stepped up beside Grizz without touching him and said one word, low, movement. Grizz stood. He looked down the street. He looked at the boy. He looked at the two halves of the key in his palm, and something settled in his face. Not peace, nothing like peace, but the particular resolution of a man who has been running from one thing and toward another thing simultaneously for 30 years and has finally stopped moving long enough to understand which direction he was facing. Inside, he said, to Eli, to Crow, to everyone within earshot. Everyone inside. He picked up his helmet from the Harley's seat with one hand, slid the half key and the locket into his jacket pocket with the other. The black SUV turned off the main street. It was heading toward the service station, and somewhere in the locked garage behind them, beneath 30 years of dust and silence, the motorcycle that started all of this was waiting. And Grizz was beginning to understand that whatever his daughter had hidden in this town, whatever was worth sending an 8-year-old boy across state lines to find him, whatever was engraved on that eagle key, someone else already knew about it, someone who hadn't arrived to talk. The black SUV stopped at the far end of the lot and sat there with the engine running. No one got out. The headlights were off, which meant whoever was inside had been watching long enough to know the layout of the lot before they pulled in. The angle of the canopy, the sight lines from the boarded windows, the gap between Grizz's parked Harley and the station wall. You didn't case a location like that in the 30 seconds it took to drive down from Main Street. You did it earlier. You did it before the motorcycles arrived. Crow had Eli by the shoulder, not rough, not gripping, just the steady presence of a large hand communicating direction without words, and they were moving toward the side door of the station building. The door was unlocked. The boards on the windows had gaps. It wasn't fortified, wasn't ideal, was simply the only structure available that put walls between the boy and the street. Grizz didn't move toward the building. He stood beside his Harley and watched the SUV. Grizz, Shepard's voice low and close behind him. Inside. I'm not going inside. There could be 3 men in that vehicle. There could be 6. It doesn't change what I'm doing. What he was doing, Shepard understood, was standing in plain sight on purpose, making himself visible and readable, giving whoever was in the SUV a clear signal that the Iron Covenant knew they were there and had chosen not to scatter. It was a specific kind of message. It required a specific kind of nerve. Shepard had watched Grizz deliver that message in one form or another for 20 years, and it had never stopped being unsettling to witness. Marcus and T-Bone? Grizz asked without turning. Marcus is on the north approach. T-Bone's at the motel. He says the room Mrs. Aldridge used was cleaned out. No personal items, no luggage. The woman left in a hurry or was told to leave in a hurry. Grizz absorbed this without visible reaction. The man Eli described, social worker. Anyone matching that at the motel? Manager says a man checked in 2 days ago under the name Garrett. Paid cash. NATO watch, short hair. Left this morning. But his key card was used to access the exterior lot door at 6 a.m., which is 3 hours after Mrs. Aldridge's car left, according to the exterior camera. He was watching the room after she left. He was watching the boy. The SUV's engine cut. Both front doors opened. 2 men got out. They were dressed in the unspecific clothing of people who want to look unremarkable. Dark jeans, canvas jackets, boots that were too clean for the geography. The man on the driver's side had his hands visible and moved casually. The performance of casual, the way trained people move when they want untrained people to relax. The passenger was shorter, broader, and made no such performance. He kept his right hand near his jacket pocket and scanned the lot with the systematic attention of someone counting threats. Grizz recognized the body language. He'd worn it himself in a different country in a different decade. Private, he said quietly. Shepard followed his read without asking for clarification. Former military, current private employment, which meant either corporate security or something with considerably less legal structure. In Red Creek, Colorado, standing beside an abandoned gas station with a dead woman's grandson, the odds of corporate security were low. The driver stopped about 15 feet from Grizz. He smiled. It was a professional smile, constructed and deployed like a tool. Mr. Mercer, he said. Gideon Mercer? Depends on who's asking. My name is Callahan. I work for Hargrove Development Group. I think you may have something that belongs to our client. I don't own anything that belongs to a developer. Callahan's smile held. There was a woman named Rachel, last name she used was Shea, who passed away recently in Coopersville. She left behind some personal documents that are the legitimate property of our client. Property records, deed transfers, survey materials. These items were part of an ongoing legal matter that was never resolved. He paused. We're simply here to retrieve them and avoid any further confusion. The word confusion arrived with the particular weight of a word standing in for a different word. Grizz looked at him steadily. You drove from where? Denver. Plate on that vehicle's a Colorado short-term rental. Rental agreements have GPS. Your company knows where you are right now. Callahan's smile shifted almost imperceptibly. That's correct. So does mine. Grizz held up his phone, the screen showing a text conversation. I sent our location to an attorney in Glenwood Springs 11 minutes ago, with photographs. He didn't elaborate on whether any of that was true. His face gave nothing. What documents, specifically? Property deeds pertaining to parcels in Colfax and Red Creek counties, survey records from 1988 through 93, and any storage devices or physical keys associated with those records. There it was, the key. He'd arrived at it within 2 minutes, which meant the key was the point. The deeds were the framing, and everything else was furniture. Don't know anything about keys, Grizz said. Mr. Mercer, we're done talking. Grizz turned his back on both men and walked toward the station building. Get off this lot. He heard Callahan say something to the other man. Quiet, clipped, not meant to carry. The shorter man's boots scraped gravel. Grizz didn't look back. He pushed through the side door and let it close behind him. Inside, the light was the color of old mustard. 2 bare bulbs on a wire across the ceiling, one dead, one working at about 40%. The smell was motor oil and cold concrete and something underneath both. That might have been the particular staleness of a building that had been closed for years. Eli was seated on an overturned milk crate near the workbench. Crow stood by the boarded window, eye to a gap in the board, watching the lot. Brix Dominguez was on the phone in the corner, speaking Spanish at low volume. He was 44 years old, barrel-chested, a former Army mechanic who'd served 2 tours and come home with a Purple Heart and a hearing problem he'd never gotten properly treated. He had the focused energy of a man running parallel tracks, listening to whoever was on the phone while simultaneously monitoring everything in the room. He caught Grizz's eye and held up 2 fingers, then pointed at the phone. 2 minutes. Grizz nodded. He moved to Crow at the window. Through the gap in the board, Callahan and his associate were standing beside the SUV talking. Callahan had a phone to his ear. The associate was watching the station building with the flat, patient attention of someone who has been told to wait and knows waiting is temporary. They're not leaving, Crow said. No. What are they after? Grizz pulled the 2 half keys from his jacket, held them together. The eagle looked back at him, wings half raised, composed, something almost arrogant in the rendering. Whatever this unlocks, he said. Crow studied the keys. And you don't know what that is? I know it's connected to property records in this county from the late 80s and early 90s, and I know my daughter spent 30 years making sure nobody found it before this boy got old enough to deliver it. He closed his fist. That's enough for now. Crow was quiet for a moment, then, Grizz, are you sure about the boy? The question was asked carefully, without accusation, because Crow was not an accusatory man, but it was asked. Grizz looked at him. He has her eyes, Grizz said. That's not a thing you manufacture. People can manufacture a lot of things. Not that. His voice was flat, final. Not those eyes. Crow accepted this. He was not a man who pressed past a wall that had been clearly posted. From across the room, Eli spoke. He'd been quiet since they came inside, seated on the crate with his hands on his knees, watching and listening with the stillness of a child who'd learned that silence collected more information than questions. The man at the motel, Eli said. Garrett. He asked about a name. He said, Did your mother ever mention the name Hargrove? I said no. Every adult in the room looked at him. Did she? Grizz asked. Eli looked at the floor. He was working through something. Not whether to answer, Grizz thought, but how to answer it fully and correctly, which was a different kind of hesitation. She kept a box under the bed, Eli said. A metal box, locked. She thought I didn't know about it, but I saw her open it once. There were papers inside and a cassette tape, and something else. I couldn't see clearly. He looked up. When she got sick the last time, the bad time, she took the box somewhere. When it came back, it was lighter. She didn't know I noticed. A pause. She kept saying she was taking care of things. Grizz crouched down in front of him. The floor was cold under his boots. His knees ached with the drop in temperature. He looked at the boy for a long moment. Did she ever talk about Red Creek, he said. Not by name. She talked about mountains. She said, Eli pressed his lips together briefly. She said there was a place where everything went wrong, and someday someone was going to make it right. She said it like she meant it, not like a story. He met Grizz's eyes. Like something she'd been waiting on. Bricks ended his call and crossed the room. He stopped beside Grizz and spoke low. That was Reyes. He ran the Hargrove Development Group through his contact at the county recorder's office in Denver. Active LLC registered in 2019, but the principals trace back to a parent company called Rathmore Land Holdings that's been operating in Colorado since 1987. Grizz stood slowly. Rathmore, he said. You know the name. It wasn't a question. Bricks had read his face. Grizz moved to the workbench and stood with his back to the room for a moment, hands flat on the dusty surface. The name Rathmore was not a revelation. It was the opposite. It was the thing that had always been there at the edge of his memory of that last year, 1993, the year Rachel left. Rathmore Land Holdings had been buying parcels in Red Creek and the surrounding county for years before then, through shell transactions and quiet foreclosures and leveraged county tax defaults. The machinery of land acquisition designed to be invisible at the level of individual transactions and obvious only when you map the whole county at once. His father had refused to sell. His father's station, this station, the one they were standing in right now, sat on a corner parcel that connected two acquisition blocks, and without it, the assembly was incomplete. His father had died in 1993. October. A week after Rachel left. The official cause was cardiac arrest. He'd been 61 years old and had not had a prior cardiac history. Grizz had never pursued it. He'd been consumed by Rachel's disappearance, then the fire, then the identification attempt and its inconclusive end, and by the time the grief had settled enough for him to think clearly, years had passed, and the county records had been reorganized under a new administration, and his father's death sat in a closed file alongside everything else that Red Creek had quietly buried. He turned around. The Brotherhood was watching him, all of them, Crow, Bricks, Shepherd, and through the interior doorway, the faces of Marcus and T-Bone, who had come in through the back while Grizz was at the window. 9 more men stood or leaned in the tight space of the garage, having filtered in silently while the conversation with Callahan played out, all of them watching their president. Grizz looked at them. He did not speak immediately. He had the habit, under pressure, of taking the extra 5 seconds, not from uncertainty, but from a deep-seated refusal to give an incomplete thought. His brothers knew the pause. They waited it out. This station belonged to my father, he said. And before that, my grandfather. 3 generations of Mercers in this county. He set the 2 key halves on the workbench. My daughter found something 30 years ago, something that connected Rathmore Land Holdings to what happened here, to my father, to this station, to the land seizures in this county. And instead of coming to me with it, he stopped. His jaw tightened. She ran. The silence in the room was dense. Shepherd broke it. Why? The word was straight and unornamented. Grizz looked at him. Because I told her to get out. He said it the way you say something you've rehearsed in private for 30 years without ever intending to say aloud, with the specific worn flatness of a sentence that has been carried so long it no longer has weight. She came to me in September of '93. She was pregnant, scared, and she had documents. She'd worked for a county surveyor that summer, office work, filing. She'd seen things, names, figures, property transfers that didn't add up. She wanted to go to the sheriff. He paused. I told her to stay out of it. Told her she was 22 years old and pregnant, and she had no business involving herself in county politics. I told her. Another pause, longer. I told her if she wanted to throw her life away, that was her choice, but she wasn't taking her mother's grandchild down with her. No one spoke. She left that night, Grizz said. 3 days later, the car went off Highway 9. And I spent 30 years believing I'd sent her to her death because I was too afraid of what she'd found to let her show it to anyone. Eli was very still on the milk crate. His face held the expression of a child, hearing the shape of something he'd suspected without having the words for it. Not shock, but a kind of terrible confirmation. Grizz looked at him. He held the boy's gaze. She didn't die, he said. She ran. She hid. She kept you safe. He picked up the 2 key halves. And she sent you to me when she couldn't stay hidden anymore. The side door opened. Everyone's head came up. Marcus stepped back in from the lot. He was 29, the youngest member of the Covenant by 4 years, and he had the look of someone who'd been doing controlled breathing to stay calm. The SUV is gone, he said. Callahan and the other one left about 5 minutes ago. They didn't go far, Grizz said. No. T-Bone's tracking from the north side. They parked on the highway shoulder past the county line marker, engines running. Marcus looked at Shepard. There's a second vehicle now, a white work truck, Colorado plates, Idaho County registration. It pulled in behind them about 2 minutes ago. Shepard absorbed this without expression. Idaho County was 7 hours north. Nobody drove 7 hours to park on a Colorado highway shoulder at 6 in the evening. How many in the truck? Shepard asked. T-Bone counted 3. 5 men total. On a highway shoulder outside a dying town where the only occupants were 12 bikers, an 8-year-old boy, and whatever was hidden in a locked compartment that half a brass key was cut to open. Grizz walked to the old Harley in the center of the garage and stood beside it. The canvas tarp was still folded back from when he'd lifted it. He looked at the machine up close in the bad light. The oxidized chrome, the cracked seat, the original handlebars. Then he crouched and began running his hands along the frame. "What are you doing?" Crow said. "Whatever this key opens," Grizz said, hands moving along the tank, the fender mounts, the side covers. "It's in this bike. You don't know that." She worked for a county surveyor. She had documents. When she ran, she couldn't take the documents. They were too large, too identifiable, too dangerous. But she could take a key. She could give me half a key and hide the other half in a locket small enough for a child to carry across state lines without anyone understanding what it was. He moved to the gas tank. Old Sportsters from this era sometimes had secondary chambers, not factory standard, modifications. His hands found a seam that shouldn't have been there. She knew I'd come back to Red Creek. October, every year. She knew this station would still be here because nobody wanted it. Rathmore couldn't legally take it because my father never defaulted on it before he died, and after he died it went into a probate that was never resolved. He pressed against the seam. Something shifted. She hit it where she knew I'd eventually look. The seam gave. A panel in the lower front face of the tank swung outward on a small hinge, and inside the cavity, a secondary tank space, welded and sealed, no larger than a shoebox, something was visible in the dim light. The room went utterly quiet. Inside the cavity rested a metal box. Small, flat, military grade, the kind issued for field document storage. The lock on its face was a standard barrel lock. Crow handed Grizz the joined halves of the key without being asked. The 2 pieces fitted together cleanly, blade to blade. Grizz inserted them into the lock. They turned. The box opened. Inside, a cassette tape in a clear plastic case, labeled in handwriting he recognized as Rachel's. Small, precise, right-leaning. A set of folded documents, water-stained at the edges but legible. A photograph, face down, and a sealed envelope with a single word on the front. Dad. Grizz did not move for a full 5 seconds. Then he picked up the envelope and straightened up. He held it without opening it. His hands were steady. Everything else about him was not. "Grizz," Shepard said carefully, "whatever's in those documents, these people outside know what it is. They've known about this box long enough to be sitting on a highway shoulder within an hour of us finding it." Yeah. That means someone told them we were here, today, specifically." Shepard paused. "That's not Callahan. That's not 5 guys on a shoulder." Grizz looked up from the envelope. "Someone in this room," Shepard said. The word landed like a stone into still water. Every man present felt the ripple. 12 men. Brothers. 20 years of shared road, shared blood, shared silence. The idea of an informant inside the Iron Covenant was not a thing that could be spoken lightly, and Shepard had not spoken it lightly. His voice was level and deeply uncomfortable, the voice of a man who wished he were wrong and was not prepared to pretend he might be. Grizz looked around the room slowly, face to face, 11 pairs of eyes looking back at him, some hard, some controlled, some tight, with the specific misery of men being suspected alongside their brothers. Eli watched from the milk crate. His eyes moved, quiet and systematic, reading the room the way his mother had taught him to read rooms. "Nobody knew we were coming to Red Creek," Grizz said. "No," Shepard said. "I didn't signal the exit. I didn't tell anyone we'd stop here." "No." "So either someone tracked us." Grizz stopped. He turned to Marcus. Marcus was 29, youngest, 4 years in. He'd patched in after a recommendation from T-Bone and had been clean and solid and present for every run, every obligation, every vote. He was standing near the door with his hands visible and an expression that was working very hard to stay neutral. Grizz looked at him. "Marcus," he said, "your phone." Marcus went still. The stillness lasted half a second too long. "Grizz, your phone. Hand it to Bricks." The room compressed. Nobody moved except Bricks, who took 2 steps toward Marcus and held out his hand, palm up, waiting. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket slowly. He produced his phone. He placed it in Bricks's palm. His jaw was working on something, an explanation, a defense, something, but it hadn't arrived yet, and in the gap where it should have been, the silence did its work. Bricks looked at the phone. He navigated without asking the passcode because Marcus hadn't locked it, and that itself was a tell. A man with something to hide locks his phone. Bricks looked at the screen. He looked at Grizz. His expression did something complicated and then went flat. He turned the phone to show the room. An outgoing message. Sent 40 minutes ago, timed to within minutes of the Iron Covenant's arrival in Red Creek. A single line of text to a number with no saved contact name. Mercer stopped. "Red Creek service station. He has the boy." The room absorbed this. Crow made a sound that was not a word. T-Bone, in the doorway, turned away. Marcus didn't look at anyone. He stared at the oil-stained floor and his hands hung at his sides, and he breathed through his nose with the careful regulation of a man trying to hold something together that was already in pieces. "Why?" Grizz said. One word, the whole weight of it. Marcus looked up. His eyes were red at the rims, not from crying, from something worse than crying, from the particular strain of a man who has been holding a position that has cost him continuously and is now watching the cost come due all at once. "My sister," he said. "They have my sister." Nobody moved for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time inside a room where 11 men are processing the same information from 11 different angles. And the information is that the youngest among them sold them to the people currently parked on the highway shoulder with a running engine and 3 additional bodies in a white work truck. Then Crow moved. He was across the room in 4 steps and had Marcus by the jacket collar before anyone else had shifted weight, and Marcus went with it. Didn't resist, didn't flinch, just let himself be taken, because somewhere in the mechanics of what he'd done he had already accepted what came next, had probably been accepting it for however long he'd been carrying this. "Crow." Grizz's voice, flat, immediate. Crow stopped. He didn't release Marcus, but he stopped. Marcus's boots were barely touching the floor. He was not a small man, but Crow had 4 inches and 40 pounds on him, and the particular leverage of controlled fury, which is more efficient than the uncontrolled kind. "Put him down," Grizz said. Crow lowered him, kept his grip on the collar. Marcus straightened his jacket with one hand. The other hand stayed at his side. He was breathing through his nose in the careful way of a man who has made a decision to stay still, regardless of what his body wants to do. "Talk," Grizz said. Marcus looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up. His eyes went to Grizz first, then moved, involuntarily, Grizz thought, to Eli. Something moved in Marcus's face when he looked at the boy. Something that wasn't calculation. "Her name is Danny," he said. "My sister. She's 26. She's been living in Pueblo for 3 years. Good job, apartment, the whole thing. Stable." He stopped, swallowed. 6 weeks ago, a man came to her work. Said he represented a firm doing land rights consulting. Said there was a matter in Red Creek County they needed help documenting and they'd pay well. He looked at his boots. "She called me excited. I told her to be careful. She said I worried too much. Another pause. 3 days later, she stopped answering her phone. The room breathed. When did they contact you? Shepard said. 4 days after she went quiet. A man called my cell. Number I didn't know. He said Danny was fine, that she was being held somewhere safe, and that the only way she stayed that way was if I helped them locate someone named Gideon Mercer and a boy traveling with an older woman from Coopersville. Marcus's jaw worked. He described Eli. Hair color, age, the locket. He described it exactly. They'd already been watching him, Brick said. For how long, I don't know. The man on the phone didn't offer details. Marcus finally looked at Grizz directly, and the look was not comfortable to give or receive. He said if I went to you, she died. If I contacted law enforcement, she died. If I did anything except send the location when you stopped, she died. He spread his hands, the gesture of a man displaying the inside of something empty. I've been riding with you for 4 years. I know what I did. I know what it means. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm not thinking about forgiveness, Grizz said. He turned away from Marcus and moved to the workbench where the metal box sat open. He picked up the cassette tape in its case. Rachel's handwriting on the label. Small, right-leaning, precise. He set it back down. He picked up the folded documents. Property deeds, survey records, the kind of paperwork that becomes meaningful only when you understand the larger pattern it belongs to. And Grizz was only beginning to see the edges of that pattern. He picked up the photograph. He turned it over. It was a color photograph, faded to the warm orange tones of early 90s film stock, printed on the thin, glossy paper of that era. It showed 3 men standing outside a building Grizz recognized immediately as the Red Creek County Recorder's Office, a 1-story brick building on Mineral Street that he'd passed 100 times over the years without stopping. 2 of the men he didn't recognize. The third man was facing the camera, slightly turned as though caught mid-motion, not posing. He was perhaps 50 in the photograph. Heavy-set, gray suit, the look of a man who moved through institutional spaces with the comfort of long familiarity. Grizz stared at the third man for a long time. He knew the face. Not from 30 years ago. From 2 years ago. From a Colorado Motorcycle Safety Coalition dinner in Denver, where the Iron Covenant had been invited as community liaisons. A political gesture from a newly elected county commissioner who was courting every constituency in the state with equal enthusiasm. The man in the photograph was Commissioner Dale Whitmore, current sitting commissioner for Mesa and Garfield counties, former chief administrator of the Red Creek County Recorder's Office from 1988 to 1997. The same Dale Whitmore who had reorganized and digitized the county records in 1995, the reorganization that had made certain pre-1993 documents difficult to locate. Grizz set the photograph down carefully. Shepard, he said. Shepard was beside him in 2 steps. Grizz turned the photograph to show him. Shepard looked at it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, is that who I think it is? Yeah. The man who gave the keynote at the coalition dinner. Yeah. Shepard exhaled slowly through his nose. He looked at the 2 men in the photograph whose names they didn't yet have, and then at Whitmore's caught mid-motion posture, and something shifted in his expression. The particular recalibration of a man who has just understood that the problem is larger than the immediate geography. If Whitmore's connected to Rathmore, Shepard said, keeping his voice below the room's general noise, this isn't a land dispute. This is 30 years of public corruption, active, ongoing. With a sitting commissioner attached to it, Grizz said, which means law enforcement in this county is not an option. No, not yet. Not until we know how deep it goes. Not until we know how deep it goes. Eli spoke from across the room. His voice was calm in the way that had stopped surprising Grizz, or had started surprising him continuously, which amounted to the same thing. My mom talked about a commissioner, Eli said. Not by name. She said... He paused, working through the exact phrasing the way he did, with the care of someone who understood that the words mattered. She said there was a man who was supposed to protect people, and instead he made sure nobody got protected. Grizz looked at him. She say anything else about him? She said he was the reason she couldn't go to the police. Eli's eyes moved to the photograph in Grizz's hand, then back up. Is that him? Grizz turned the photograph to show him. The boy looked at it for a long time. His expression didn't change in the dramatic ways of performed recognition. It changed in the small ways, a slight tightening around the eyes, a fraction of stillness added to the stillness already present. She had a picture of him, Eli said, in the metal box. She'd look at it sometimes when she thought I was asleep. He paused. She didn't look at it like she hated him. She looked at it like she was afraid of him. Those are different. They are, Grizz thought. They are entirely different things. The wind hit the boarded windows. Outside, the October dark was coming in fast. The mountain dark that isn't a gradual thing, but a decision. The light cutting off as the ridgeline swallowed the sun. In the gap under the side door, the temperature drop was visible as a slight draft that moved the dust on the floor in slow eddies. T-Bone appeared in the interior doorway. He'd been outside monitoring the highway shoulder position. His jacket was wet across the shoulders. It had started raining somewhere in the last 20 minutes, a cold October rain that would be snow before midnight. They moved, T-Bone said. Every head turned. The SUV and the work truck both left the shoulder about 4 minutes ago, headed south on the county road. He paused. There's a third vehicle now. Black panel van, no running lights, came in from the Red Creek Canyon Road, which means it was already in the valley before we got here. He looked at Shepard. Parked behind the old rail depot on the south end, engines off. Shepard did the math aloud for the room. SUV, work truck, panel van. 5 men plus however many are in the van. Rail depot puts whoever's in the van between us and the south approach, Crow said. Canyon Road is the only other exit from this valley besides the highway. If they've got the highway and the Canyon Road, we're boxed, Bricks said. The words sat in the room without decoration. Grizz looked at Marcus. Marcus was standing exactly where Crow had put him down, had not moved since, which was either respect or something closer to surrender. His face had the look of a man waiting for a verdict he deserved. Your sister, Grizz said. You have any way to reach her directly? No, the man who calls me uses a different number each time. Burner phones. When's the next scheduled contact? He said he'd call at 9 tonight. Confirmation that I'd completed the task. Grizz checked his watch. 42 minutes. What happens if you don't confirm? Marcus's expression answered before his mouth did. He didn't specify. He didn't have to. Grizz turned away. He moved to the old Harley in the center of the floor and stood beside it with his hands on the handlebars. The original handlebars straight and unmodified, the chrome gone to brown. He stood there the way he sometimes stood beside his own bike when thinking, using the physical connection to the machine as a kind of grounding, a way to slow the processing down to something usable. The Iron Covenant watched him. 11 men, 10 brothers, and a man who'd betrayed them and was still, for the moment, present and unconstrained, which was itself a statement about how Grizz ran the Covenant. You didn't disappear people. You didn't decide outcomes in the heat of revelation. You waited until you had all the information, because the heat of revelation was exactly when bad decisions got made permanent. Open the tape, Grizz said, not to anyone specific. Bricks found a small cassette player on the workbench. An ancient thing, a radio tape combo unit from the mid-90s with a cracked battery door held shut with a rubber band. The kind of object that accumulates in storage spaces and outlasts every prediction about its relevance. He checked the batteries. Dead. He replaced them with batteries from a flashlight, the kind of improvised solution that men who work with their hands perform without comment or pride. He pressed play. The tape hissed. Then Rachel's voice came out of the small speaker, and the sound of it hit Grizz in the center of the chest like a physical impact. Not loud, not dramatic, not the voice of someone performing a final statement. Just a voice. Her voice. The voice of a woman in her early 50s, worn at the edges by decades and illness, but recognizable in its cadence to anyone who had known her at 22. She spoke for 11 minutes. The room was completely still for all 11 of them. She described working for the county surveyor's office in the summer of 1993. She described the documents she'd found, survey records showing property line alterations that preceded foreclosure proceedings by weeks, alterations that benefited Rathmore Land Holdings exclusively across 14 separate parcels. She described the name that appeared on internal authorization memos. Whitmore, then a mid-level administrator, signing off on survey modifications he had no legitimate authority to approve. She described going to her father. His reaction, the argument, leaving. She described the car she'd borrowed from a friend going off Highway 9 3 days later. Not by accident, she said, with the flat certainty of someone who had spent 30 years certain. The car had been tampered with. She'd gotten out before it went over. She'd climbed down the canyon in the dark and walked 8 miles to the next town and called the only person she trusted, a woman named Louisa, who had grown up in Harlan County and had no connection to Colorado or Red Creek or anyone in Griz's life. She described 30 years of movement, Harlan County, then Coopersville, then smaller places between them. Working cash jobs. Keeping Eli's last name as Mercer because she refused, she said, to let them take the name too. She described the illness diagnosed 18 months ago, the decision that followed. She described the box, the contents, where she'd hidden the key. Then she paused. When she spoke it again, her voice had shifted register. Not softer, not harder, but closer. The way a voice changes when someone is no longer speaking to the record, but to a person. "Dad," she said, "I need you to hear this part clearly." The room did not breathe. "Whitmore is not the top of this. He's the mechanism, not the engine. There's a man named Coulter, Arthur Coulter, who's been the principal of Rathmore Land Holdings since its founding in 1987. He has never appeared in a public document connected to the company. His name is in the internal memos I photographed. The originals of those memos are in the box with this tape." A pause. "Coulter is connected to development interests in 4 western states. What happened in Red Creek was small. What he built afterward was not. The property in this valley, the full assembly of Red Creek parcels, was the seed investment for everything that came after. He cannot let those original memos surface. They connect him to the survey fraud, and the survey fraud connects him to Grandpa's death." The tape hissed. "I know what I'm saying," Rachel said. "I've known it for 30 years. I couldn't prove it then. I can prove it now. Everything you need is in that box." Another pause. Longer. "I'm sorry I ran," she said. "I'm sorry I didn't trust you to handle it. I'm sorry I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I thought if I brought you the documents, you'd bury them. I thought you'd be more afraid of losing me than of doing what was right. I was 22 and I was wrong, and I've had a long time to understand how wrong I was." The voice was very steady. "You would have fought for it. I know that now. I knew it before I finished the drive south, if I'm honest. But I was already gone by then." The tape moved in silence for a moment. "Take care of Eli," Rachel said. "He's better than both of us were at his age. He's better than I deserve to raise." A breath. "Tell him his mother wasn't hiding. Tell him she was waiting." The tape hissed and ran blank. Bricks stopped the player. The sound of the rain on the roof had grown while the tape played, heavy drops on old metal, a sound without sympathy or context. Grizz was standing with both hands on the old Harley's handlebars. His head was down. His knuckles were white. No one spoke. Eli sat on the milk crate with his knees together and his hands folded in his lap and looked at a point on the floor about 3 feet in front of him, and his face held the controlled expression of a child who is saving something for later, for private, for the dark hours when no one is watching, because right now there are people watching, and the people watching need him to be okay. Grizz lifted his head. His eyes were dry. Not from the absence of whatever the tape had done to him internally, but from the specific discipline of a man who had learned decades ago that grief spent in public is grief that costs you something you don't get back. He would pay that cost later, in private, the way he always paid the costs that mattered. He looked at the photograph. Whitmore. The 2 unnamed men. The recorder's office brick facade in the background. "Arthur Coulter," he said. Shepard had his phone out already. "Running it." The side door opened again and a man came in fast. Reeves, who they called by his full last name because his first name was Leland, and he'd broken 3 noses over it in his 20s. He was dripping rain and breathing hard, and his expression had the compressed look of someone carrying multiple pieces of bad news and trying to determine the order of delivery. "Talk," Shepard said. The panel van at the depot moved. It's 2 blocks north now, sitting on Copper Street with the engine off and the lights off. I made 4 individuals through the windshield. Couldn't be certain. Could have been 5. He paused. "And there's something else. The motel on the creek. Room 7 is burning." The room took a second to process this. "Mrs. Aldridge's room," Crow said. "Whatever was left in it," Reeves said. "The manager called it in. Fire department is volunteer out here. Nearest station is 12 miles. He looked at Grizz. They're burning the trail. Destroying evidence. Not of what was in the box, like they didn't have the box, but of the connection between the boy and this place. Registration records, any communications Mrs. Aldridge might have left, the paper trail of Eli's arrival in Red Creek. They don't need the documents, Shepard said slowly, working through it aloud. They have Whitmore. He controls what's in the county record system. If they eliminate the physical evidence in the box, and the people who've heard the tape, Brick said. The sentence completed itself. Grizz looked at Marcus. Marcus had heard it too. The logical conclusion. He stood with it, his expression going through something stark, and then settling into something that looked almost like resolve. The resolve of a man who has decided that if he's going to be useful, now is the moment to be useful. The 9 o'clock call, Marcus said. Let me make it. Let me tell him the task is done, that you have the box and you're moving tonight. They'll want confirmation. I can give them a location, somewhere we're not. He held Grizz's gaze. I know what I owe. Let me start paying it. Grizz studied him. Not warmly, not with the comfortable regard of a brotherhood relationship, with the cold, precise attention of a man assessing an asset under duress, because that was what Marcus was right now. An asset who had been compromised and was offering to be useful, and the question was not whether Grizz trusted him, but whether the offer was worth more than the risk. Where's your sister actually being held? Grizz said. I don't know. I swear I don't know. If we run a false location play, they'll know within minutes it's false. When they know, I know what happens to Danny. Marcus's voice cracked on the name, just slightly. He controlled it immediately, but it had cracked. And in the crack was the entire content of 4 years of brotherhood and one catastrophic choice, and a sister who was 26 years old and had called her brother excited about a consulting job. I know, but right now they think they're winning. They have the positions, they've burned the motel room, and they think you're going to run because that's what people do when they're boxed. He looked around the room, at his brothers, at the faces of men who were somewhere between fury and the uncomfortable recognition that his math wasn't wrong. We don't run. Shepard looked at Grizz. Grizz looked at Eli. The boy had raised his head during the last exchange. He was watching Marcus with the particular quality of attention he gave to things he was deciding about, full, quiet, without the telegraphed conclusions that adults sometimes performed. He's telling the truth, Eli said. The room turned to him. Eli looked at Grizz. I can tell when someone's lying. Mom taught me. His hands aren't doing the thing liars' hands do. A pause. He's scared, not lying. Marcus looked at the boy. Something moved in his face that was too complicated to name. Grizz stood up from the handlebars. He rolled his shoulders. He reached into his jacket and produced the 2 key halves and set them deliberately on the workbench beside the open metal box. Reeves, get the bikes under cover. Back of the garage, tight. No lights. T-Bone, I want eyes on all 3 vehicle positions every 4 minutes. Bricks, that cassette tape goes inside your jacket and doesn't leave your body until I say different. He looked at Shepard. The documents go in 2 separate places. You take half, Crow takes half. You split up if it comes to it. He looked at Marcus last. You're with me. You make the 9 o'clock call exactly as discussed. You tell them we're heading for the Canyon Road exit, that we're splitting into 2 groups. You give them the south end of Copper Street as the intercept point. He paused. If you deviate from that by 1 word, I will know it. I understand, Marcus said. I don't think you do yet, Grizz said quietly. But you will. He turned to the room. We're not running, he said. We're not hiding. We have 12 motorcycles, 11 men, 1 box of evidence, and a cassette tape that will end Arthur Coulter's operation if it reaches the right hands. He picked up Rachel's photograph. Not the one from the box, but the Locket photograph. The one Eli had carried across state lines. The one with the little girl on the gas tank of an olive green Harley. He looked at it for a moment and then set it back down. My daughter spent 30 years keeping this safe. She sent her son to find me because she believed I would do what she couldn't. I'm not going to make her wrong twice. The rain intensified on the roof. Cold, insistent, the kind of rain that means business. Eli stood up from the milk crate. He crossed the room to the workbench. He picked up the Locket photograph and held it out to Grizz. She'd want you to have it, Eli said. Not in a box. On you. Grizz looked at the photograph. He took it. He folded it carefully along the existing crease and placed it in the inside pocket of his leather jacket, against his chest. Then his phone rang. Not Marcus's. His. The number on the screen was a number he didn't recognize, Colorado area code. He let it ring twice. He answered. Mr. Mercer. The voice was unhurried, the voice of a man who had calculated his position and found it satisfactory. Not Callahan. Older, smoother, the particular ease of someone who has conducted this kind of conversation before. I think we've gotten off to an unnecessarily complicated start. I'd like to simplify things. Grizz said nothing. You have a box, this voice said. I want it. You have a boy I have no interest in harming. I have something that belongs to a young man in your company. This seems like a situation with an obvious solution. Who am I talking to? Grizz said. A pause. Brief. Almost amused. My name is Arthur Coulter. Every person in the room who could see Grizz's face watched it go through something. Not shock, not fear, but the cold consolidation of a man who has just heard confirmation that the enemy is larger and closer and more confident than the worst-case estimate had suggested. Coulter was calling him directly, not through intermediaries, not through Callahan, directly from a number that could be traced, using his real name, which meant one of two things. Either Coulter was so confident in his control of the situation that he saw no need for cover, or the situation had reached the point where speed mattered more than concealment. Neither interpretation was comfortable. I'm listening, Grizz said. Good, Coulter said. Then listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once, and the next 30 minutes will determine how this ends for everyone involved. The voice paused. Including the boy. The rain on the roof sounded like static, like a signal decaying at the edges, and the single working bulb overhead flickered once and held. And in the yellow light of the garage, Grizz stood with the phone to his ear and his free hand closed at his side, and the 11 men around him were already moving to their positions without being told, because they had ridden together long enough to know that the moment a president's jaw sets in exactly that way, the talking portion of the evening is almost over. Here's what's going to happen, Coulter said. His voice came through the phone with the unhurried quality of a man dictating terms he'd already decided were final. No static, no distortion. A clean signal, which meant he was close. Not highway shoulder close. Closer than that. You're going to bring the box and its contents to the east entrance of the rail depot in 20 minutes. You're going to come alone. The boy stays where he is, unharmed, and in exchange I return the young woman currently in my company's care, and we conclude this without any further inconvenience to anyone. Grizz stood with the phone pressed to his ear and his eyes moving across the faces of his brothers, reading the room the way he'd learned to read rooms in a country far from Colorado, when reading rooms was the difference between walking out and not. The young woman's name is Danny Webb, Grizz said. Say her name. A pause. Precise, controlled. Old. Danny Webb. She's unharmed. She's comfortable. That's not what I asked. Another pause. Slightly less controlled this time. She's unharmed. I want to hear her voice. Mr. Mercer. I want to hear her voice or this conversation is over, and you can explain to whatever federal investigators eventually show up why a sitting county commissioner's name appears on internal memos authorizing fraudulent survey records in Red Creek County in 1993. Grizz kept his voice level and completely cold. Your move. The line went quiet for 4 seconds. Then there was a shuffle, a muffled exchange of words Grizz couldn't make out, and then a woman's voice, young, strained, doing the same controlled breathing Marcus had been doing since they'd discovered his phone. Marcus, her voice. Not a question. She knew who would be listening. Danny's here, Grizz said. Across the room, Marcus closed his eyes. The line shuffled again. Coulter returned. 20 minutes, he said. Alone. The box. The call ended. Grizz lowered the phone. The rain on the roof had settled into a steady rhythm, heavy and indifferent, the kind of rain that doesn't announce itself or apologize. Through the gap under the side door, a thin wash of water was beginning to spread across the concrete floor, cold and dark. He's at the depot, Shepard said. Or wants us to think he is, Crow said. He's at the depot, Grizz said. The panel van is there. Callahan and the SUV are on Copper Street. The work truck. He looked at T-Bone. T-Bone had his phone in his hand, text on the screen from Reeves, who was still outside in the rain. Work truck moved north. It's sitting on the highway approach, blocking the on-ramp. So, the highway north was the work truck. The canyon road south had been the panel van's original position. Now, Coulter himself was at the depot, which sat at the canyon road entrance. Copper Street, which ran parallel to the main street and connected the north and south approaches, held Callahan's SUV. 3 points of a triangle, and the Iron Covenant was at the center. He's not expecting negotiation, Shepard said. He's expecting you to walk into the depot and not walk out. I know. Then we're not doing that. No, Grizz said. We're doing something else. He moved to the old Harley in the center of the floor. He stood beside it for a moment, hands on the tank, and then he looked at Bricks. How long to get this running, he said. Bricks blinked. He looked at the 1963 Sportster. The cracked seat, the oxidized chrome, the 30 years of storage breathing out of every joint and seal. Grizz, that bike hasn't turned over in how long? Bricks crouched and began moving around the machine with the systematic attention of a man cataloging problems fast. He checked the tank, the lines, the battery terminals. He pulled the spark plug on the left cylinder, examined it, replaced it. Battery's dead. I can jump it from my bike. Carbs gummed. Might clear, might not. Tires are cracked, but they'll hold pressure for a while. He stood. 15 minutes if everything goes my way. You've got 10, Grizz said. He turned to the room. 11 faces. 12 counting Marcus, who was technically still present and technically still part of the count. And Grizz had made a decision about that which he hadn't announced yet. Here's what we're doing, he said. He laid it out in the shorthand of men who had planned in compressed time frames before, in parking lots and truck stops, and the back rooms of places that didn't exist in any official record. No excess words, no repetition, no asking whether anyone understood, because if you needed to ask, you'd pick the wrong men. Shepard and Crow took the documents and the tape, split between them as discussed, 2 separate bodies, 2 separate routes. They were going north on foot, through the creek drainage, bypassing the highway approach entirely. The work truck couldn't cover the creek bed. They would reach the highway a quarter mile above the on-ramp and call the Colorado Bureau of Investigation from there. Not local law enforcement, not county sheriff, not anyone whose jurisdiction touched Whitmore's sphere of operation. The CBI field supervisor in Grand Junction had no connection to Red Creek County. That call, once made, once the documents and tape were described in specific enough detail, would trigger a process that Coulter could not stop, regardless of what happened inside this garage in the next hour. Reeves and T-Bone took 4 additional brothers and split into 2 pairs. One pair creating movement noise on the north end of Main Street, visible, loud, drawing the attention of the work truck. One pair moving on Callahan's SUV on Copper Street with the specific objective of disabling the vehicle without confrontation if possible, confrontation if not. That left Grizz, Bricks, and Marcus. And Eli. The boy goes with Shepard, Grizz said. Eli opened his mouth. Don't, Grizz said. Not harsh. Final. Eli closed his mouth. He looked at Grizz with Rachel's eyes, and in them was the specific frustration of a child who is smarter than the situation is giving him credit for, but who also understands when an adult has made a decision that arguing won't move. You go with Shepard, Grizz said. You stay with him until you hear from me directly, not from anyone else, directly from me. You understand? Yes, Eli said. If you don't hear from me... Grizz stopped. He looked at the boy for a moment. You'll hear from me. He moved to Eli and crouched in front of him. The concrete was cold under his knees. This close, in the bad light, the boy's face held every contradiction of his situation. 8 years old and composed, carrying grief that would have bent most adults, waiting with a patience that shouldn't have been possible at his age, and was, Grizz knew now, entirely Rachel's doing. She had raised this child to survive the things she'd been surviving for 30 years. She'd built him for exactly this moment. Grizz put his hand on the boy's shoulder, briefly, solidly. Your mother didn't run, he said. She held a position for 30 years until she could pass it to someone she trusted. He kept his eyes level with the boys. You held it the rest of the way. That's done now. You can let it go. Eli's chin moved, just slightly. He held it. Okay, the boy said. Grizz stood. Bricks had the old Harley's tank open and was running a jump cable from his own bike's battery, the machines side by side in the center of the floor, like two generations of the same conversation. The garage smelled of gasoline and cold metal and the particular sharpness of 30-year-old rubber beginning to warm. Marcus stood apart from the others, which was the position he'd occupied since the phone was handed to Bricks, and which he hadn't tried to change. He was watching Grizz with the expression of a man waiting for a sentence. Grizz walked over to him. He stood in front of Marcus and looked at him for a moment without speaking. Marcus held it, didn't look away, didn't offer anything additional, just stood with the stillness of someone who has run out of things to offer and knows it. "You're going to the depot," Grizz said. Marcus's expression shifted. Not relief, not readiness. Something more complicated. "You're going to tell Coulter's people that you brought a message from me, that I want an additional hour to consider his terms." Grizz held Marcus's gaze. "That buys Shepard and Crow time to reach the highway. While you're buying that time, you're going to find your sister." "I don't know where in the depot." The panel van was at the depot for 2 hours before it moved to the street. If they've had Danny in transit, they would have used the van. She's either still in it or she's in the depot building. Either way, the van is your starting point. Grizz paused. "When you find her, you get her out the north side of the building, through the rail yard, and you go to ground until this is over. You don't engage anyone. You don't play hero. You get her out." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "And after?" "After is after," Grizz said. "We handle after when it's after." It was not forgiveness, and both men knew it, but it was a door left ajar rather than sealed, and Marcus received it for exactly what it was. Not more, not less. "I won't mess it up," Marcus said. "I know," Grizz said, and turned away before Marcus could read anything further into the words. Bricks hit the starter on the old Sportster. The engine turned, coughed, turned again, caught on the third attempt with a sound that was rough and uneven and deeply alive. The particular voice of a machine that has been sleeping for decades and is angry about being woken up and is awake regardless. The combustion cycling through gummed passages and clearing them by force. Every man in the room heard it. Several of them looked at the old bike with expressions that crossed mechanical satisfaction with something older and less nameable. Grizz walked to the Harley. He sat on it. The cracked leather seat settled under his weight with a sound like an old complaint. The handlebar grips were hard and smooth, the rubber dried to something close to plastic. He revved the engine twice, feeling the carb clear, the idle smoothing from rough to ragged to almost even. He looked at the garage door. Crow opened it. The rain came in immediately, cold, diagonal, the kind of October rain that is 10 degrees away from being something else entirely. The main street of Red Creek was dark and wet and empty, the neon of the gas station sign reflecting in broken pieces on the wet asphalt. Grizz rode out. He didn't take the route to the depot directly. He took the alley behind the main street, moving slowly, the old engine muttering at low RPM. Headlight off, because the original headlight wiring was 40 years past reliable, and he disconnected it before he rolled. He navigated by the ambient light of the rain-reflected sky and the occasional yellow window of a Red Creek house, occupied by someone staying well away from whatever was happening on the street tonight. He came around the south end of Main Street and stopped on the far side of the hardware store, engine idling. The depot was visible from here, a long, low brick building from the 1940s. The kind of structure built to last because the people who built it intended to use it for generations. The windows were dark. The east entrance, the one Coulter had specified, was a loading dock with a concrete platform and a single overhead light that was currently on, throwing a pool of yellow illumination onto wet brick. The panel van was parked at the north end of the depot, visible from this angle. Its rear doors were closed. No visible movement around it. One man at the east entrance, standing under the light with his hands visible, the body language of someone positioned to be visible. A greeter. A signal that the door was open. Grizz watched for 90 seconds. He counted windows, counted sight lines, noted the absence of movement in the locations where movement should have been visible if additional men were positioned at the corners. They were inside, not on the perimeter. That told him something about Coulter's confidence, or his impatience, or both. His phone vibrated. A text from Shepard. Creek clear. Moving. Good. 14 minutes since they'd gone out the side door. The work truck on the north approach was occupied, watching Main Street, where Reeves and his partner were making themselves loud and visible. He could hear it, faintly, over the rain. The sound of motorcycles revving on the north end. The sound of men who wanted to be heard. He texted back one word, "Go." Then he rode toward the depot. He came in from the west, not the approach Coulter would have anticipated. And he rolled the old Harley to a stop 30 feet from the east entrance loading dock and sat there in the rain with the engine running and let the man at the door see him. The man at the door straightened. He said something into a radio at his shoulder. Grizz sat. After 20 seconds, the depot's east door opened from inside and Arthur Coulter walked out. He was perhaps 65, compact, the kind of man who had been athletic in youth and kept a version of it into age through discipline rather than ease. He wore a dark jacket over a collared shirt, no tie. The deliberate informality of a man who wants to signal that this is a conversation between equals, which itself signaled that it was not. His face was unremarkable in the specific way of men who have spent decades being deliberately unremarkable, the face of someone who has learned that being memorable is a liability. He stopped at the edge of the loading dock and looked at Grizz on the old Harley in the rain. "That's not your motorcycle," Coulter said. "No," Grizz said. "It was my father's." Something moved in Coulter's face. Brief, controlled, the micro-adjustment of a man recalibrating. "You came alone," Coulter said. "You said to come alone." "And the box?" Grizz reached inside his jacket and produced the metal box. He held it where Coulter could see it. Coulter's eyes went to it and held there for a moment with the particular attention of a man who has been waiting for a specific object for a very long time. "Come inside," Coulter said. "We can resolve this quickly." "We can resolve it here," Grizz said. Coulter looked at him. The rain fell between them. The overhead light caught the water on Grizz's jacket and turned it silver. "Mr. Mercer," Coulter said, "you're an intelligent man. You understand that whatever is in that box, whatever your daughter documented, the chain of custody is broken. 30 years of storage in an uncontrolled environment, no legal authentication. The individuals who could have verified the original documents in 1993 are either dead or beyond reach." He folded his hands in front of him, a gesture of patience. "This becomes a very expensive, very prolonged legal process that damages reputations and accomplishes nothing conclusive for anyone." "There's a cassette tape," Grizz said, her voice. 30 years of documented timeline. That's admissible. "A cassette tape of a deceased woman's allegations." Coulter's voice stayed even. "Your daughter, who was involved in a contentious family dispute and disappeared under circumstances that you arranged," Grizz said. Silence. The rain filled it. "You put her car off Highway 9, Grizz said. His voice was the voice of a man who has been holding a thing at a precise distance for a precise amount of time and is now closing that distance deliberately. "She survived. You didn't know. For 30 years you didn't know, because if you'd known she was alive, she wouldn't have stayed alive." He paused. "My father was less lucky." Coulter's face had gone very still. "Your father had a cardiac event," Coulter said. "My father had a cardiac event 1 week after he refused to sell this station to a Rathmore Shell Company for the 3rd time. He was 61 years old with no cardiac history." Grizz's hand tightened on the box. "I spent 30 years not looking at that because I was drowning in everything else. I'm looking at it now." "You have no evidence. The memos in this box show a pattern that a forensic accountant and a medical examiner working together will find very interesting," Grizz said. "And I've got the CBI's field supervisor's personal number in my recent calls, so—" The door behind Coulter opened. Callahan came out. The man who'd arrived with him earlier, the shorter, broader one, was behind him. And behind that man, a third figure that Grizz hadn't seen before, taller, younger, carrying himself with the specific neutrality of someone hired for a function rather than a relationship. 4 men on the dock, Coulter plus 3. Grizz stayed on the motorcycle. His hand stayed on the handlebars. "Mr. Mercer," Coulter said. His voice had dropped the pretense of the patient, reasonable voice. What was underneath it was less warm and more accurate. "I've done this before. In Mineral County in 1998. In Pitkin County in 2004. People find documents, people make recordings, and then the situation is managed and the documents are no longer relevant and life continues." He took 1 step forward. "Give me the box." No, Grizz said. Callahan moved off the dock. He landed on the wet asphalt with the assurance of a man who had been waiting for this transition and was comfortable in it. Grizz revved the Harley once. The old engine responded with a sound that was disproportionately loud in the wet night air, a sound with 30 years of anger behind it. Callahan stopped. That bike doesn't have enough left in it to go anywhere useful, Callahan said. Probably not, Grizz agreed. His phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. He didn't reach for it. He'd felt the pattern of vibration he'd asked for. 2 short, 1 long. Shepard's signal. The CBI call had been made. The documents and tape were no longer exclusively in the metal box in his hand. They were in the hands of a federal agency that had no love for Red Creek County politics and no reason to protect Dale Whitmore from anything. Grizz set the metal box on the old Harley's tank in front of him. He looked at Coulter. "You should know," he said, "that your window closed about 30 seconds ago." Coulter stared at him. "Everything in this box has been described in detail to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation field office in Grand Junction. The documents, the tape, the photograph with Whitmore, the property deed chain, the Rathmore LLC structure tracing to your name." Grizz's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You can take this box right now and burn it, and it won't change what's already moving." The temperature of the loading dock changed. Coulter's face went through something that had nothing patient or calculated in it. A brief, exposed passage of the emotion that lives underneath 30 years of successful management and has never had to be looked at directly because the management always worked. Then it closed again. "Take him," Coulter said. Callahan moved. The broad man moved. The tall younger man jumped off the dock. Grizz dropped the box into his jacket, hit the throttle, and the old Harley, the 1963 XLCH Sportster, the machine his father had owned and his daughter had hidden evidence inside, and that had been sleeping in this town for 30 years, waiting for exactly this moment, answered with everything it had. The rear tire broke loose on the wet asphalt and then caught, and the bike launched left off the loading area and into the rail yard behind the depot, and Grizz bent low over the bars and rode. The rail yard was a geometry of wet gravel and old track beds and switching infrastructure that hadn't been maintained in 20 years. And riding it in the rain with no headlight on a carbureted machine that hadn't run in 3 decades was the kind of riding that bypassed thought and operated on something deeper and older. He knew where the tracks were by sound, the note the gravel changed when it became packed rail ballast. And he knew where the open space was by the absence of reflection, and he rode by those 2 senses and didn't brake. Behind him, he heard a vehicle start. The panel van, pulling around the north end of the depot into the rail yard. Headlights swept across the gravel and found him, and in the sudden wash of light he saw the yard opening up ahead, the end of the switching infrastructure, the long straightaway of the main rail line heading north, and beside it, 4 motorcycles. Bricks, T-Bone, Reeves, and a man named Casper who never talked much and was excellent in situations like this one, sitting on their bikes at the edge of the yard with their engines running and their headlights off and waiting. Grizz rode toward them. The van accelerated. He heard it before he saw it in the mirrors he didn't have. The engine note rising, the crunch of a larger vehicle finding grip on wet ballast, and he opened the old Sportster up to everything it had, which was not what it had been in 1963, and was more than it had any right to be after 30 years of sleep, and the machine responded with a rattling, furious speed that was technically insufficient and practically enough. He reached Bricks and the others and cut left, looping behind them. Bricks rode forward, then T-Bone, then Reeves, then Casper. 4 motorcycles in a line, headlights coming on simultaneously, flooding the yard with light, heading directly toward the van at speed. The van driver braked. In the seconds that this took, Grizz came around the side of the arrangement and was past the van and in the clear. And the 4 men who'd ridden at it were already splitting, 2 left, 2 right, using the van's stopped position as a pivot, going around it and away, back toward the north end of the yard. The van sat in the middle of the yard with its headlights on and nowhere obvious to go. Grizz rode north, the old Harley shaking under him with the effort of sustained speed and decades of stiffness, every joint in the machine communicating its displeasure in a different frequency, the whole thing staying together through some combination of engineering and stubbornness that felt appropriate to the moment. His phone vibrated again. He didn't check it. He came out of the rail yard onto the county road north of the depot and the 4 bikes fell in around him, 2 ahead, 2 flanking. The formation of men who had drilled this until it was reflex, the shape of a brotherhood moving as a single organism. And in the middle of it, the old Sportster, with its cracked seat and its rough idle and its 30 years of stored purpose, carried Grizz Mercer north through the rain toward the highway. He didn't look back at the depot. He looked forward, at the dark, wet road and the mountain dark on either side and the faint suggestion of the highway ahead. And he thought about a 22-year-old woman driving this same road in October 1993, with evidence in her lap and nowhere safe to go, and a father who'd told her to stay out of it. And he thought about an 8-year-old boy sitting in a garage in Red Creek with Shepard's hand on his shoulder, waiting. His phone went again. This time the pattern was different. Not Shepard's signal, a number he didn't recognize. He slowed enough to pull the phone from his pocket. The text was from Marcus. "She's out. North side rail yard, clear. We're moving." Grizz read it twice. He put the phone away. He opened the throttle and the old Harley screamed into the dark, and the rain, and the Iron Covenant rode around him like a wall, like a moving answer to everything the night had brought, and the road opened up ahead of them, and behind them in the depot parking lot, Coulter's phone was already ringing with a number from Grand Junction he had not expected to see tonight and would not be able to ignore. And the 30 years that Rachel Mercer had spent waiting for this specific chain of events to complete itself was finally, irreversibly, violently in motion. Then the work truck's headlights appeared on the highway on-ramp directly ahead, blocking the road. And out of its cab came not Callahan, not one of Coulter's men, but a figure in a county sheriff's department jacket with a hand raised, and behind the truck, 2 more vehicles with the light bars of law enforcement, and Grizz had exactly the length of a thought to determine whether this was Whitmore's Reach, arriving in a uniform, or something else entirely before he had to make a decision that would determine everything. Grizz squeezed the brake. The old Harley shuddered to a stop on the wet asphalt 20 feet from the work truck, the engine coughing once, and then settling back into its uneven idle. The rain came down between him and the figure in the sheriff's jacket, straight and cold, catching the light bars of the vehicles behind the truck and breaking it into red and blue fragments on the road surface. The figure kept its hand raised. Not a weapon. A hand. Palm out. Bricks pulled alongside Grizz on the left, T-Bone on the right. The 4 of them sat in a line with their engines running and the rain coming off their jackets, and nobody moved. The figure in the sheriff's jacket walked forward into the headlight wash. She was perhaps 50, compact, with the walk of someone who had spent a career covering difficult ground in difficult weather and had stopped being bothered by either. The jacket was a legitimate department issue. Grizz could see the stitching at this distance, the badge placement, the radio at her shoulder. And her face was the face of someone who was cold and tired and had driven fast to get here and was not affiliated with anything Coulter operated. He could tell because she was alone out in front of the vehicles. Coulter's people moved in groups, used numbers as the primary language of authority. She'd walked forward by herself, which was either very brave or the particular confidence of someone who didn't consider the alternative worth contemplating. She stopped at 10 feet. "Gideon Mercer," she said. Not a question. "Yeah." "Special Agent Carla Doss, Colorado Bureau of Investigation." She held up a credential case, badge and ID, and the rain made the laminate gleam. "I got a call from our field supervisor in Grand Junction 40 minutes ago. He told me to get to Red Creek immediately, that I'd find you on the North County Road, and that whatever you were carrying was more important than anything else I'd worked on this year." She paused. "He wasn't wrong about the important part, was he?" "No," Grizz said. "Are you injured?" "No." "Is there a child named Eli Mercer currently safe?" "Yes. He's with 2 of my men, south end of town." She absorbed this with the economy of someone processing quickly. Her eyes moved across the 4 motorcycles, the men on them, the old Sportster that was clearly not road legal and was clearly also not the first thing she intended to address tonight. Then they came back to Grizz. "I'm going to need whatever you have," she said, "and I'm going to need your account of where Arthur Coulter is right now." Grizz looked at her for a long moment. The rain fell between them without opinion. Behind her, the 2 law enforcement vehicles sat with their light bars running, CBI vehicles, not county, not sheriff, the specific agency with the specific jurisdictional independence that Shepard had understood was the only option when he made the call from the creek drainage. He reached inside his jacket and produced the metal box. He held it out. Doss walked forward and took it. She looked at it briefly, looked at the lock, looked at the two key halves Grizz had taped together along the break. He'd done it with electrical tape from the workbench in the last minutes before leaving the garage, a jury-rigged solution that had held the drive. She didn't comment on the tape. Rail depot, Grizz said. South End. Arthur Coulter, a man named Callahan, and at minimum 3 additional individuals. There's also a panel van that was operating in the rail yard as of 15 minutes ago. He paused. There's a county commissioner named Whitmore who has a connection to the Rathmore Land Holdings entity. His name is in the documents. Doss's expression didn't change dramatically, but something behind it shifted. The recalibration he'd seen on Coulter's face earlier, only in an entirely different direction. Dale Whitmore, she said. You know the name. We've had an interest in that name for about 18 months, she said. We didn't have enough. She looked down at the metal box. Until now, apparently. She turned back to her vehicles and made a hand signal. Doors opened. 4 agents moved out into the rain with the purposeful organization of people who had a destination and the authority to reach it. Mr. Mercer, Doss said, turning back. Stay available. We'll need full statements from you and from your men. She paused. And from the child, when he's ready, gently. He'll be ready, Grizz said. She nodded. She walked back to her vehicle. The convoy began moving south toward the depot. Grizz sat on the old Harley in the rain and watched them go. Bricks pulled up alongside him, close enough to speak without raising his voice. That's it? That's most of it, Grizz said. What's the rest of it? Grizz looked at the road. At the dark mountains on either side, the rain coming off the peaks, the creek audible below the road grade, running fast with the additional water. The rest of it, he said, takes longer. He turned the old Harley south and rode back into Red Creek. The town looked the same as it had 3 hours ago, which seemed wrong in the way that places always seem wrong when they haven't changed, and you have. The gas station sign still buzzed its intermittent neon. The creek still ran beneath the Main Street bridge. The hardware store still had the same cardboard in its lower left window where glass had broken and not been replaced. But the motel on the creek was different. Room 7 had burned to its frame on one side, the fire out now under the rain, the char smell mixing with wood smoke and wet ash. The adjacent rooms were intact, the exterior wall of room 8 scorched but standing. The motel manager, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a bathrobe over work clothes, stood in the parking lot with his arms folded, watching the damage with the expression of a man adding up numbers he didn't want to see. Shepard's motorcycle was parked beside the office. Grizz pulled in. Shepard came out of the office doorway with Eli beside him and 2 other brothers flanking at a respectful distance. Eli was wearing someone's jacket, too large, the sleeves rolled twice, the Iron Covenant patch visible on the back turned inward because someone had folded the lapel for him. He was dry, which meant he'd been inside during the rain, which meant Shepard had done his job. The boy looked at Grizz on the old Harley. He looked at the machine for a moment, the cracked seat, the oxidized chrome, the rattling idle. And then he looked at Grizz's face. You're okay, Eli said. Not a question. Assessment. I'm okay, Grizz said. Did the CBI come? Yeah. Shepard called them, Eli said, with a trace of satisfaction that belonged entirely to a child. He told me. He said it was the right call because county law enforcement might be compromised, and you need jurisdictional independence when you're dealing with embedded corruption. He delivered this in Rachel's cadence, the precise retention of specific language, the habit of a child raised by a woman who understood that information was the most portable thing you could give someone. Grizz looked at Shepard. Shepard looked back without expression. He asked, Shepard said, and you told him. He's 8, not uninformed, Shepard said. There's a difference. Grizz looked at the boy. Something moved in his chest that he didn't try to name or manage. He let it be there. You hungry? He said. Eli blinked. Of all the things he'd apparently been prepared for, this hadn't been one. Yeah. There a diner in this town? There was one on Main Street. I don't know if it's open. Let's find out, Grizz said. The diner was open. Barely, technically. The sign in the window said closed, but the lights were on inside, and a woman who turned out to be both the owner and the only staff present was wiping down the counter when Grizz pushed the door and the bell above it rang. She looked up at the 12 bikers filing in through her door and at the boy among them and made a rapid private calculation. "Coffee's hot," she said. "Grill's cold, but I can do eggs." "Eggs is fine," Grizz said. They filled the diner. The booths along the window, the stools at the counter, the two small tables near the back. The woman, her name, embroidered on her uniform in red thread, was June, moved behind the counter with the efficient, unhurried motion of someone who has worked a service job long enough that the human variables have stopped surprising her. She poured coffee without asking. She produced a hot chocolate from somewhere for Eli, setting it down in front of him without comment, and Eli looked at it and then looked at her and said thank you with the seriousness of a child who means it. June nodded once. She went back to the grill, the diner filled with the sounds of 12 men sitting down, of coffee cups on formica, of rain against the plate glass windows, of boots finding positions under tables. The overhead lights were warm and slightly yellow, the old incandescent kind that threw light in all directions and softened things. Outside the window, Red Creek's main street was dark and wet and empty, the neon of the gas station reflected in the puddles. Crow sat across from Eli. He was not a small presence in a diner booth. The tattoo on his face, the size of him, the particular quality of stillness he carried. But he set his coffee down and looked at the boy without the performance of being careful, which was its own kind of care. "You doing okay?" Crow said. Eli considered this with his characteristic honesty. "I'm tired," he said, "and I keep thinking about things my mom said that I didn't understand at the time. And now I understand them, and I don't know if that's better or worse." Crow was quiet for a moment. "Usually worse before it's better," he said. "In my experience." Eli nodded, as though this confirmed something he'd suspected. "She talked about you," Eli said. Crow blinked. "Me specifically?" "Not you specifically. About the Brotherhood. She said..." Eli wrapped both hands around the hot chocolate mug. "She said the thing she regretted most was that she'd taken me away from the kind of people who understand what loyalty actually costs." He looked out the window. "She said most people talk about loyalty like it's a feeling. She said the real thing is what you do when the feeling has run out and you're still there." Crow looked at the boy for a long moment, then he looked at his coffee. "Your mom was smart," he said. "She was the smartest person I knew," Eli said. And then his face did the thing it had been carefully not doing all evening. The controlled surface of it cracked, just slightly, at the corner of the right eye, a single fracture in the composure, and he pressed his lips together and looked very hard at the hot chocolate and held it. Crow reached across the table and put one large hand over both of the boys. He didn't say anything. He just left his hand there. Eli held himself together for another 3 seconds. Then he stopped holding and put his face down and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, the quiet, desperate crying of someone who has been saving it up across state lines and hours and danger and is finally in a place where it's safe to spend it. The diner absorbed this without comment. The brothers who were close enough to see it found reasons to look at their coffee, their hands, the rain on the window. Not from discomfort, but from the particular respect of men who understand that grief has its own geography and doesn't need an audience. June came out of the kitchen with a plate of eggs and set it beside the hot chocolate without a word. She went back without looking at the boy, which was the most tactful thing anyone did all night. Crow kept his hand where it was until Eli straightened up, which took about 90 seconds. Eli wiped his face with the sleeve of the too large jacket. He looked at the eggs. "Thank you," he said. To Crow, to the jacket, to the eggs, to all of it. "Eat," Crow said. Eli ate. Grizz sat at the end of the counter with his coffee and watched the room. He watched Bricks and T-Bone arguing in low voices about something mechanical, the argument of men who need to talk about a machine because talking about the machine is easier than talking about the last 3 hours. He watched Reeves sitting alone at the small table near the back, staring at nothing, the posture of a man doing the private accounting that comes after. He watched Shepard on his phone at the far booth, speaking quietly and efficiently, handling the administrative aftermath the way Shepard always handled aftermath, with the minimum of noise and the maximum of effectiveness. And he watched Marcus. Marcus had come in last, after everyone else was seated, and had taken a stool at the far end of the counter, the position of a man who is present and not claiming belonging. He had his coffee, and he sat with it, and he didn't speak to anyone. Beside him, on the stool that had been empty, Danny Webb sat down. She had come in from the back. Grizz had seen her briefly in the doorway with a female CBI agent, had understood that Doss's people had found her in the rail yard after Marcus's text, had gotten her checked and cleared at the scene. She was 26, dark-haired, with the family resemblance to Marcus visible in the jaw and the set of the eyes, and she was wrapped in a mylar blanket from a first responder kit that she'd kept around her shoulders in the walk from wherever the agent's vehicle had dropped her. She sat down next to her brother. Marcus looked at her. She looked at him. The entire conversation between them happened in the space of 5 seconds without a single word. The specific compressed communication of siblings who have known each other long enough that language is optional for the most important things. Then Donnie put her head on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus put his arm around her. He looked at the counter surface. His jaw worked once. He held very still. Grizz turned back to his coffee. He drank it slowly. It was decent coffee, the diner kind. Not remarkable, but adequate. Hot enough to mean it. Outside, the rain had begun to lighten. Not stopping, but easing, the way October rain sometimes does in the mountains before it turns to something else. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and felt the folded photograph there. The one from the Locket. The little girl on the gas tank, grinning at whoever held the camera. He didn't take it out. He just held it. June came and refilled his coffee without asking. She stood across the counter from him for a moment. "You the one who brought all these people in here," she said. "My fault," Grizz said. "Good," she said. "I was about to close an hour ago. I'm glad I didn't." She picked up the coffee pot and moved down the counter. 2 hours later, the rain stopped entirely. The silence it left behind was the particular silence of a mountain valley after weather has passed through. Clean, cold, with a quality of acoustic clarity that made the creak audible from inside the diner and the drip from the awning outside each separate and distinct. Doss came in at 4:40 in the morning. She took a stool, accepted coffee from June without preamble, and sat across the counter from Grizz with the look of someone who had been working for the last several hours with sufficient success to be tired rather than frustrated. "Coulter is in custody," she said. "Grand Junction detention pending arraignment. Callahan and 2 associates, same. The 3rd associate is cooperating, which is going to accelerate the process considerably." She drank coffee. Dale Whitmore was taken from his residence in Garfield County at 3:15 a.m. He didn't resist. His attorney was on the phone within 8 minutes, which tells you something about the attorney's expectations. "The documents hold up," Grizz said. "Our forensic document team will authenticate formally, but the preliminary read is yes. The survey modification memos with Whitmore's signature, the property deed chain, the internal Rathmore communications, combined with the recording." She paused. "Your daughter was meticulous. She cross-referenced everything. Every claim in that recording corresponds to a physical document in the box." "She had 30 years, Grizz said. Doss looked at him. "That's not a small thing," she said. "What she did. Alone. With a child. For 30 years. "No," Grizz said. "It's not." She drank her coffee. "The property in Red Creek County, the assembled parcels that Rathmore acquired through the fraud, is going to be a lengthy legal process. Years, potentially, to unwind. But the legal basis is compromised, which means the acquisitions are challengeable." She paused. "Your family's station specifically, the probate was never resolved because there was no one to resolve it. There may be a path to reversion through the estate." "I don't want it," Grizz said. Doss looked at him. "The station," he said. "I don't want it for myself, but there are families in this county who lost property in those years. If there's a legal path to challenge the acquisitions, I'll make sure someone is looking at the full picture," Doss said. "That's a promise I can make." Grizz nodded. Doss set her coffee down. She looked at the room, the bikers in the booths and at the counter, the boy in the corner booth who had fallen asleep against Crow's arm with the empty hot chocolate mug in front of him, the particular tableau of exhausted people occupying a warm space after a cold night. "I need to ask you something," she said, "about Marcus Webb." Grizz waited. "He provided material assistance to the individuals holding his sister," she said carefully. "The communication, the location disclosure, that's a legal matter that requires—" "His sister was taken to compel him," Grizz said. "I understand the circumstances. His sister was taken specifically because these people had identified the connection between our Brotherhood and the situation in Red Creek. They targeted her to neutralize him. He paused. Whatever Marcus did, he did under direct coercion with an immediate threat to a family member's life. And the moment he had an opportunity to act otherwise, he did. Doss looked at him steadily. That context will be part of the record, she said. I'm not the DA. How it gets treated is not entirely in my hands. I understand, Grizz said. I'm telling you the context. Noted, she said. She stood, put money on the counter for the coffee. June made a dismissive gesture, which Doss ignored and left the money anyway, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the glass. Mr. Mercer, she said, your daughter's recording is going to be the cornerstone of this case. It's going to be entered into evidence, played in court, probably covered in some capacity in the press. She turned slightly. The public record will establish what she did, what she preserved. I want you to know that. Grizz looked at her. Thank you, he said. She nodded once and walked out into the pre-dawn dark of Red Creek. Dawn came in slowly over the east ridge, the gray lightening by degrees rather than arriving, the way it does in mountain valleys where the sun has to clear significant elevation before it means anything at the floor level. The diner windows went from black reflection to gray transparency to the gradual revelation of the main street outside. Wet asphalt, the hardware store, the gas station with its neon finally off, the creek glinting in the first available light. Eli woke up when the light changed. He sat up from against Crow's arm with the disoriented seriousness of a child recalibrating, taking in the diner and the brothers, and the gray morning coming through the window and assembling it all back into the correct order. Crow had been asleep himself, head tipped back against the booth, and the shift in weight woke him too. They sat for a moment, the old biker and the 8-year-old, looking at the morning coming through the glass. Is it over? Eli asked. The danger part, Crow said. His voice was rough with sleep. The rest takes longer. Eli considered this. That's what Grizz said. He says that a lot. Usually right. Eli turned in the booth to find Grizz. Grizz was at the counter, where he'd been most of the night. He'd fallen asleep on his forearm for a while around 3, and had woken when Doss came in. Now he was on his 3rd or 4th coffee, the cup in front of him, his hands around it. Eli slid out of the booth. He walked to the counter and climbed up on the stool beside Grizz. He sat there for a moment. June materialized from the kitchen, refilled Grizz's coffee, and without being asked, set another hot chocolate in front of Eli. She went back without comment. What happens now? Eli said. Grizz turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. He looked at the surface of it. He thought about what Rachel had said on the tape, the phrasing she'd chosen, the particular precision of it. And he thought about 30 years of October rides and what they'd been in place of and what they'd never been able to substitute for. You got somewhere to be? He said. Eli looked at him. No, he said. Mrs. Aldridge said she'd come back if I called, but she said it was up to me. Where'd you go to school? Coopersville Elementary, 3rd grade. Grizz nodded. He drank his coffee. He was aware of the weight of the photograph in his inside pocket, the small rectangle of faded color against his chest. Colorado has decent schools, he said. In some places. Eli looked at him carefully. The way he looked at things, he was deciding about. Are you asking me to stay? Eli said. Grizz looked at him. The pale gray-green eyes, the sharp jaw, the dark hair, the careful precision of his attention, which was Rachel's, the steadiness under pressure, which was also Rachel's, the willingness to sit with an uncomfortable question and not fill the silence with a premature answer. I'm asking what you want, Grizz said. Eli was quiet for a moment. He looked at the hot chocolate. He looked at the room. The brothers in the booths, Crow now awake and looking out the window, Bricks drinking coffee and not pretending not to listen, Marcus and Danny at the end of the counter, Danny asleep against her brother's shoulder now. My mom said you'd argue about the locket, Eli said. She said you'd argue about everything at first because you don't know how to just accept things. She wasn't wrong, Grizz said, but she also said, Eli stopped, looked at his hot chocolate, looked up. She said underneath the arguing you'd always been the kind of man who showed up. She said she knew that even when she was angry at you, she said that was the hardest kind of person to stay angry at. He paused. She didn't say that in a sad way. She said it like it was the most important true thing she knew about you. Grizz looked at the counter. He sat with that for a long time. The diner was warm. The rain was gone. Outside, the first real light of the morning was coming down the east slope of the ridge, touching the wet street and making it briefly bright. "I have a house in Grand Junction," he said finally. "It's not much. 2 bedrooms, garage." He paused. "The second bedroom's got a bunch of tools in it right now. Take a week to clear it out." Eli processed this. "Would I have to change schools?" he said. "Probably." "I didn't really like my school that much anyway," Eli said. Grizz almost smiled. He caught it just before it arrived, which was his habit, the 30-year habit of a man who'd grown careful with visible things. Then he let it come. Just slightly. "Okay then," he said. Eli picked up his hot chocolate. He drank it without performance, without ceremony, without the dramatic weight that the moment might have invited from a different child. He was 8 years old and his mother had died 6 weeks ago, and he'd carried a locket across state lines through danger to find a man he'd never met. And now he sat in a diner in Red Creek at dawn drinking hot chocolate with that man beside him and the Iron Covenant around him, and he let it be exactly what it was. Outside, Shepard was walking toward the diner with his phone in his hand and a look on his face that meant something administrative but not urgent. He came through the door and stopped beside Grizz. "CBI impounded the panel van," he said. "They're releasing our bikes this morning, once they document them. Shouldn't be long." He paused. "The old Sportster's out front. I had Bricks push it to the curb. It's not going to run much farther without a rebuild." "I know," Grizz said. "What do you want to do with it?" Grizz was quiet for a moment. He thought about the motorcycle under the canvas in the garage, the 30 years of dust, the way it had responded when Bricks jumped it, rough and angry and alive against all expectation. "Bring it to Grand Junction," he said. "I'll rebuild it." Shepard looked at him, at Eli, back at him. Something moved in Shepard's face that was brief and controlled and had the particular warmth of a man who doesn't express warmth often and means it when he does. "Yeah," Shepard said. "Okay." He went and got coffee. An hour later, as the sun came fully over the ridge and the street outside turned from gray to gold, the Iron Covenant began to move. They came out of the diner once and two at a time, settling into jackets, checking phones, mounting machines. The sound of 12 motorcycles starting in sequence filled the quiet morning street of Red Creek and bounced off the storefronts and traveled up the canyon walls and returned, layered, the particular echo of the valley giving each engine note back slightly altered. June stood in the diner doorway and watched. Grizz came out last. The old Sportster was on its kickstand at the curb, battered and insufficient and present. Behind it, hitched to Bricks's bike on a borrowed trailer hitch that had materialized from somewhere in the previous hour, because Bricks was the kind of man who knew how to find things. A small equipment trailer sat waiting. Grizz stood beside the old machine for a moment. He put his hand on the handlebars. The chrome was cold from the night, the morning light moving across the oxidized surface and finding what was still there underneath. Not brilliance, but the structure of what brilliance had been, which was its own kind of testimony. Eli came to stand beside him. They stood there together, the man and the boy, in the first real morning light, with the creek running below the road and the mountains above the valley going from shadow to illuminated in the slow way of large things changing. "She used to sit here," Eli said. He pointed to the gas tank. "When she was little." "Yeah," Grizz said. "She told me about it," Eli said. "She said it was the safest she ever felt. Up high, moving fast, and not scared because you were there." Grizz put his hand on the tank. He held it there. "I was there," he said. "And then I wasn't." He paused. "I'm here now." Eli looked at the handlebars, at the old grips, dried and hard, at the eagle emblem on the gas cap, barely visible under decades of oxidation, the same eagle that was engraved on the key that had unlocked 30 years of buried truth. "Can I sit on it?" he said. Grizz looked at him. He looked at the machine. He took Eli by the waist and lifted him. Lightly, the boy was not heavy, and set him sideways on the tank, legs dangling, the same position Rachel had occupied 50 years before when someone pointed a camera and caught a moment that would survive fires and flight and a generation of silence. Eli put both hands on the gas cap. He sat up straight. He looked down the main street of Red Creek at the wet gold light on the asphalt and the creek glinting below the bridge and the mountains beyond the town, holding everything in their old indifferent patience. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Grizz stood with his hand on the handlebars and let the morning be what it was. Not resolution without cost, not healing without scar, not a story that had arrived at its ending cleanly or without damage. 3 hours of sleep and a body that ached from riding an unrestored machine in cold rain, and 30 years of a grief that was now something different than it had been yesterday. Not gone, but transformed, changed from a fixed wound into something that had a future tense. Behind him, 11 motorcycles idled. Brothers, waiting. Crow, with the bird on his face catching the morning light. Bricks, one boot on the ground, coffee in hand that he'd somehow brought from the diner. Shepherd, road captain, positioned at the front of the line, looking at Grizz with the patient readiness of a man who would ride in any direction his president chose and had no opinion about which direction that was. Marcus, at the rear of the line. Danny in a borrowed jacket beside his bike, standing, not mounted. She had her own way home to find, her own aftermath. She and Marcus had talked for a long time in the diner while Grizz slept, and whatever had been said between them had left them both quieter and more intact than they'd been before. Marcus looked at Grizz from the back of the line. Grizz looked at him. He held the look for a moment. He didn't nod, didn't gesture, didn't make it something it wasn't. But he held the look long enough for Marcus to understand that after was still after, and the door was still ajar, and Marcus received it and looked at the road and breathed. Grizz lifted Eli off the tank and set him on the sidewalk. He stood in front of the boy. "You ready?" he said. Eli looked up at him. The gray-green eyes, Rachel's eyes, the morning light in them. "Where are we going?" Eli said. "Grand Junction," Grizz said. "Home." The word arrived in the morning air between them and stayed there, simple, without ornamentation, the most ordinary and most difficult word in the language. And Eli took it the way he took everything, with the precise full attention of a child whose mother had taught him that the most important things were worth receiving carefully. "Okay," Eli said. Grizz mounted his Harley, his own, not the old one, his road machine, the one he'd ridden every October for 30 years through every kind of weather toward every version of this reckoning. And the engine started on the first turn, deep and even and settled. The Iron Covenant moved. They came off Main Street and onto the county road and then onto the highway, 12 machines in loose formation. The sound of them climbing through the gears and going south toward the junction and then west toward Grand Junction, the mountains large on every side and the sky opening up above the valley, and the morning coming in full now over the ridgeline. The old Sportster rode on the trailer behind Bricks, its cracked seat and oxidized chrome catching the light as the road opened up, going the same direction it had always been pointed, finally moving. Eli sat behind Grizz on the road machine, small hands on the sides of the jacket, watching the road unfurl behind them in the side mirror. Red Creek getting smaller, the diner's sign diminishing, the service station with its half-collapsed canopy and its boarded windows and its sign reading, Mercer and Son, becoming a shape and then a point, and then part of the landscape of what had been. He watched it until it was gone. Then he turned forward and looked at the road ahead, at the mountains and the morning and the 11 machines around them and the man he was riding with, and he held on, and they rode.